4 apartment buildings exploded in 9 days. Nearly 300 people died, and the man who solved it became president. I've covered enough rubble in my career to recognize the signature. When the first call came in August 31, 1999, early morning, I was in a Moscow bureau, half awake. A residential block in Binaksk in the Caucasus region. 94 dead in the collapse. The official line was gas leak, but the pattern was wrong, too neat, too purposeful. What nobody knew then, sitting in those newsrooms, was that 3 more would follow. 9 days later, September 9th, another building detonated in Moscow itself, Guryanova Street on the south side. 124 people crushed under concrete while they slept. I watched the footage come in on the wire. Apartment dwellers clawing through wreckage for family, children's toys in the dust. The Russian public was terrified, and the government was silent. 2 days after that, September 11th, a third building went, Kasherskoye Highway, 98 dead. Then on September 13th, a fourth, Volgodonsk, southern Russia, 16 more. In 9 days, nearly 300 Russians were dead and the nation was in open panic. Apartment blocks were being evacuated across the country. Mothers weren't letting children sleep. The question burning through every living room was simple: who? The FSB, the successor to the KGB, had a new director. A former spy from Leningrad named Vladimir Putin. He'd been in the job less than 2 months, and he moved fast. Within hours of the 4th bombing, he went on national television and made a promise: we will pursue them into the toilet and kill them there. The language was crude. The message was clear. He owned this crisis. Suspicion landed on Chechen separatists. The Caucasus region had been in open conflict with Moscow since the early 90s. Chechen militants had carried out bombings before. It made sense on the surface. But here's what the public didn't know. The investigators had a problem, and that problem would change everything. On September 22nd, 11 days after the first bombing, a 5th device was discovered, undetonated, planted in a residential building in Ryazan, about 100 miles southeast of Moscow. Police surrounded it, and when they traced it, the source, the materials, everything, they found something impossible. The fingerprints led back to the FSB itself. The FSB's official response was swift. They claimed it was a training exercise, a test of the population's vigilance. The device was harmless, they said, a dummy, but the locals who'd seen it, the experts who'd examined it, they knew better. It was live, it was real, and it had the same hallmarks as the 4 that had already killed nearly 300 people. What the average Russian didn't understand, what we in the press were still piecing together, was the political moment. Boris Yeltsin's presidency was collapsing. He was sick, unpopular, and elections were coming. The government needed a crisis, a war, something to rally around, and suddenly Putin had delivered it. By October, Putin had launched a full-scale military invasion of Chechnya. Tanks rolled south. Airstrikes began. The public supported it. They were angry, they were scared, and they had a strong man offering certainty. Within months, Putin would be prime minister. Within a year, president. The bombings had made him. Now here's where it gets murky. Journalists started asking questions. Some, like Anna Politkovskaya, whom I knew slightly, began investigating whether the FSB had orchestrated the bombings themselves, to create the crisis, to justify the war, to put Putin in power. She died in 2006, shot in her apartment on her birthday. The investigation went nowhere. The official narrative settled on Chechen militants. Specific names were released. Basayev, Karab, both were genuine Chechen fighters with histories of violence. Both denied involvement. Both were eventually killed in separate incidents. Convenient, but the Ryazan device, the FSB connection, it was never adequately explained. I've read the logbooks myself, the FSB's official statements. The inconsistencies are there if you look. The timing, the knowledge, the speed of response. But here's what I learned covering this from Moscow. Sometimes the truth doesn't matter. What matters is the narrative that sticks. And Putin's narrative, strong man, decisive action, security at all costs, it stuck. By 2000, Putin was president. The Chechen war was his war. The public had rallied. His approval ratings were in the 80s, and the investigation into the bombings, it was officially closed. The case was solved. Chechen terrorists, motive, separatism, method, explosives, finality, achieved. But independent investigators, Russian and international, kept digging. FSB defectors came forward. One, Alexander Litvinenko, claimed he'd been ordered to plant bombs. He was poisoned with polonium in London in 2006. Another source, Mikhail Trepeshkin, an FSB lawyer, said he had evidence the agency orchestrated the attacks. He was imprisoned on unrelated charges. The thing about conspiracy, real or imagined, is that it's almost impossible to prove conclusively. Too many actors, too much compartmentalization, too many incentives to lie. What we have is a pattern. Motive, political power. Opportunity, control of the FSB. Benefit, Putin's ascension. But proof, it remains contested. What's certain is this: nearly 300 Russians died in 9 days. Putin became president within months. The investigation was closed without full transparency, and every journalist who pushed hard on the story faced consequences. Whether the bombings were orchestrated or merely exploited, the effect was identical. A crisis created a strongman, and a strongman created a system. Putin would rule Russia for over 2 decades. The Chechen war would kill tens of thousands more, and the Moscow bombings would remain in the official record, a closed case. But in the archives, in the testimonies of the dead and the silenced, the questions linger. Sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones nobody can quite prove, but everyone suspects. Subscribe, we investigate the unsolved cases where power and violence intersect, and the official story doesn't quite hold.